Well, blessings. Welcome to God's house as we seek to be God's people in this place. And I'm far away from you. I'm still in Egypt. And sorry, this is my Remembrance Day service. And no poppy. That's what happens when you're in an Arab country. They were kind of on the wrong side of the war, so we don't celebrate honoring Memorial Days here like we do back home in Canada. And I'm doing this after the 11th, so I saw the virtual service in Ottawa and missed the singing, but brought memories of uncles and others and friends I have encountered along the way. My friend Wilbur Lester and Jack Hobbs, and oh my, all the amazing volunteers at the Legion in Danville, in Richmond, my friends in Mount Bruno. I've been so incredibly blessed. These people, these volunteers, these people that make sure that we don't forget, that hold banquets, the ladies' auxiliaries. I even got a medal, can you imagine, for being the chaplain in Danville for many years. And it's been such an honor and such a blessing to stand out there in South Durham with the young kids from the school. And I know all of these things we haven't been able to do the way we traditionally do, but we do a good job in Canada of remembering, especially when that whole foods thing happened and you did the protest and made them change their minds. It's hard for us. Our veterans are passing. I wanted to speak today. Well, I've always spoken in the past about my uncle in the First World War that died in the war to end all wars. And of course, then there was the Second World War. And my dear friend Wilbur, who was a Hong Kong vet. You know, the government only paid those folks $1 a day for every day they were in prison. The just wars. The war against Hitler. The good wars, if there can be a good war. Today I want to talk about, well, something I've never really talked about. Half my family on my father's side, my Aunt Margaret, married an American, and she lived in the United States, well, nearly all of her life. And her son Mike, well, Mike and Pete both fought in the war in Vietnam. But I was really close to my cousin Mike. And what I want to speak about in remembering our veterans is to remember the young people, the sacrifice of young people that died in wars that weren't just, or at least didn't seem just. The war in Vietnam when I was a kid in high school. And I remember Kent State and my high school friends wearing black armbands, and how much in Canada as a young teenager, how much we were against the war. And I remember my cousin Mike, because he sent a letter to my father, and he was asking him whether he should come to Canada, whether he should be a draft resistor. And there were many in my day. Some of my teachers were what we called draft dodgers. And of course, that war was a disaster. Well, we've had disasters since Iraq, Afghanistan. But the war in Vietnam, well, I remember it as a child or as a teenager. And in 1969, after he'd sent the letter to my father, and my father said, well, you know, your family comes from a long history of the military in the Second World War. My Aunt Margaret married Bill Kelly, who was in the American Armed Forces. And then she had the kids, and Mike was one of the kids. Anyway, he didn't come to Canada. And I was kind of mad at my father for telling him to register for the war. But he did. And he was injured. A very close friend, who was a conscientious objector, who was a medic, was blown up in front of his eyes. And he suffered and lost a lung. When I asked him years later if he remembered the letter to my father, he said no. I think one of the reasons he said no is that he became very involved with the war after. You know, after the war in Vietnam, the young people that came back who had served their country were called baby killers, were called addicts, were called all sorts of names. They didn't receive the incredible honors that we see at the cenotaph in Ottawa. It was a shame. It really was. He wrote a book, a reference book about the Vietnam War called Where We Were, and it's well respected. I did a lot of research. I found out way more about my cousin than I ever imagined. He got a master's degree in fine arts, and I knew about the drawings. He had sent me one. And what they don't know in the history, there's a drawing. If you look up Mike Kelly, war veteran in the United States, it pops up on Google. And you can see some of the drawings that he did of the war. But there's one story they don't know. There's one painting, one drawing that he did. And in the background, you'll see an old, I think it's a 1950-something Chevy or Ford. I'm not good at my cars. But that car was left by the side of the railway tracks in a little place in St. Adolphe de Howard, a lake called Deer Lake. And when it says in his biography that he lived in Montreal, it was sort of true. But the reality is that he loved Deer Lake. And that's the car that was on the side of the railway tracks for years and years at Deer Lake. And he loved that place. It was like his sanctuary. A bit of a story. I've never told it before because it wasn't in a war that people remember and admired, like the Second World War. And Mike fought for a monument in California. He was very involved with recognizing the sacrifice of the Vietnam veterans. It's always been something I've thought about saying and talking about in a Remembrance Day service. Because we need to remember our young people that sacrificed, whether they were on the good side or the bad side. I'm here in Egypt. The Arab populations fought for Hitler, but they were still young people that sacrificed their lives for something, something in most cases politicians believed in. And how much we would have peace if politicians had to be the first line of defense, if they had to be in the trenches. I think we'd see a lot less war in this world. But it doesn't take away from the youth, from the young people who sacrificed their lives in conflict. What worries me in our future is that war has changed. It's become a war of drones, of technology. Our American neighbors spend 57% of their federal dollars on the military. And the military's become more mechanized, just like agriculture and all sorts of other things we live with. And it's scary. Because in Vietnam, in the Second World War, and in the First World War, the soldiers saw the horror. They saw the pain. They lived it. The tragedy in the story of my cousin Mike is that in 2011, on the 24th of December, Christmas Eve, he committed suicide. We need to remember that the war doesn't end. It doesn't end with a date or a memorial or a medal. It ends many, many times with mental illness, mental disturbance. I never knew that he was having all those problems. He never spoke of the war, not to me. Not did a lot of the veterans that I've known on my journey. So this Remembrance Day, we remember those who died in what we call just wars, if that can ever be. We remember those that died on the other side, those that died in wars like Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. War still goes on, but we must always remember those who sacrificed their lives. Sacrificed their lives in many cases so that we can be free to have memorial services, but who sacrificed their lives even if they were misinformed, even if they were on the wrong side of history. Young lives lost. Lost in war, lost after war. Mothers who got telegrams in the First World War, like my grandmother did. Memorials that stand to testify to those that died and to those who died afterwards from the horrors of war. May we find our way to peace. May we do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God, knowing this, that those who die in service of their country do not die in vain, knowing this, that we are not alone. God is with us on the journey. Blessings. Stay safe. Keep our neighbors to the south in our prayers as we see polarization and conflict, and as we hope for a brighter and better future. May peace of God be with you on this remembrance service and these remembrance weeks and days, lest we forget. Amen.